It's playing. This isn't showing. Oh, because multiple outputs. Start. This is the chat from Rumble. This is Twitter.
That's Twitter? Okay.
I gotta see. But I can't see it. I gotta mute it.
Lost it. Sorry.
See, you've got your plasma TV, got it hooked up right into your IV. Go buying everything they're selling to you. Come to find out, nothing that they say is true. Miranda never made it to the place called Guantanamo. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Don't really matter anyway. With the state that the world is in today, and we're living on borrowed time, living on borrowed time, living on borrowed time. I read all about your disease. Change your blood, stick it in the deep freeze. Believe everything that you see. Tell me where to get your lobotomy. Did you read about the tortoise and the hippopotamus? Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, I wanna be anonymous. Help me out, 'cause I wanna be anonymous. Don't really matter anyway. Hey, yeah, yeah, yeah. State that the world is in today. Hey, we're living on borrowed time. Living on borrowed time. Living on borrowed time. Take it.
Hello. I actually did it. I'm so excited. I don't know how many of you watched me on Monday, but we did a teaser. I know many of you were there. I'm really looking forward today, and boy, do I look bright. Woo! My goodness, I look bright. I'm going to take this off, make it look a little less bright. Does anybody not have sound? Oh no. Did I already mess up? Let's see. Desktop audio. Okay, now do I have sound? How's that? Am I doing better? No? Yes? Hot pink. I know. I got rid of it. Can you guys hear me? Can I get a 5x5? Because if I can't have sound... Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. All good. Okay, so Monday, we did a teaser on the Vatican. I'm so excited about today because this is the process of blowing your mind. And I'm going to get started right into this because we got 49 slides to go through. But I'm going to start with something that I'm not sure everybody caught. So I'm just going to start there. And the reason why I'm not sure everybody caught it, because, a lot of people aren't watching what's going on at the Vatican. Although it was a white horse and it was beautiful, I think we need to talk about it before we get into everything else. Let's start with the Vatican. The Pope today got a horse. And I want to start with this because in November of 2020, Attorney General Barr got a horse. See that? It was on his front lawn. Everybody's going, why? How did it get there? What's going on? And then in February of 24, the King's Guard changed out from all black to the white horse leading. The white horse is emblematic of the authority of the king. But here you have the old guard conferring, right? They back up, they get into formation. And I'm sorry, the video's a little bit long, but you see they're backing up. This is the old guard on the right, the new guard on the left. And they're backing into formation. Notice the white horse is now heading to the front of the formation. Isn't that cute? Isn't that cute? And then they do the orders for the guard, and the guard then starts to march on. And let me just speed through. We got the old guard leaving, the new guard coming in. Come on, where is it? This is a big deal, and I'm going to explain in a minute. But just look at that beautiful white horse sitting at the beginning of the formation. I love horses, by the way. My favorite, next to birds, my favorite animal. But I'm going to try to screen through again and see if they leave. They're getting ready to go. Come on. My video's too long. There we go. Watch this. All the horses now fall into formation behind the king's white horse. And you see, he's leading the new guard out of the palace, and they'll go down through the streets of London. So like I said, the white horse is emblematic of the king's authority. Yeah, this was back in February. If you look on the slide, February 18th, 2024 is the date of the king's horse. November 1st, 2020 is the date of Attorney General Barr's horse. So now we got the white horse here. I'm going to stop that because today the Pope was gifted with his own white horse. Anybody read Revelations chapter 19 much lately? So there's the Pope getting his white horse. It's a purebred. There's a lot of significance to this, a lot of significance. So remember the Q post 1002 talking about each side of the triangle represents a subsect of power brokers. That's another part of a Q post, but we got money, power, and influence. Power, money, influence, the three cities, right? All now with their white horses. In other words, the New World Order is done. Let me explain this for a little bit because since 2020, I've been waiting for this to play out. I got real excited in 24 when I saw the King's horse. I'm thinking, okay, now what are we going to do at the Vatican? We've been waiting. When are we going to see that third symbol? Well, it happened today with Pope Leo the 14th. And if you watched me on Monday, you know the significance of the 14th. But now that we're here, look who gifted the horse. And I'm going to screw up this name. Kolobreg is a city in Poland. The whole city gifted him that horse. So why is that important? Well, that particular city used to be German, now it's Polish, um, got particularly hit hard in World War II. In fact, all of the Hanseatic cities in Europe were hit hard. Hanseatic was a medieval group. They're disbanded, but the culture is still there. They're a medieval group that came together to protect themselves from the abuses of the elite. And there you go. And all of these Hanseatic cities got hit particularly hard during World War II. So it's a medieval guild that no longer exists. But what's really cool about it is that obviously culture doesn't go away as fast. But so the damage that was created during World War II is something that is lasting in that area. So that legacy has to be fixed. So going back to the medieval roots, remembering that that city was once German, then became Polish after the war. It was almost completely destroyed after World War II. So today, giving the Pope this white horse, which I love showing, giving the Pope the white horse is pretty interesting when you consider everything. I mean, stop everything. This takes us back to Lucifer and being cast out of heaven with a third of the stars. Remember, I told the story on Monday about how Lucifer, when God told the angels of his plan to incarnate, Lucifer wanted no part of it. He was not going to bow to a man. And so St. Michael was tasked with casting Lucifer and a third of the stars out of heaven. And if you take that the next step, how many descendants was Abraham going to have? Weren't they going to number as the stars, right? Numbering as the stars. What does that mean? Well, remember I explained a third of the stars were for God the Father, a third of the stars for God the Son, and a third of the stars for God the Holy Spirit. If you cast those stars for God the Son out of heaven, that leaves us to fill the role, right? Number as the stars. Abraham's descendants will number as the stars. Here we have the three white horses. Remember, we also talked about peace. A fake peace can't happen unless it's aligned with God. And here we go. Now we're looking at Revelations coming to play here. Is this a sign of the end times? No, I'm not saying that, but I love the symbolism of all of this. We've talked about this many times in my chat. If you're in the chat, we've talked about how everything feels different now. And today I'm just over the moon with this. So going back to Revelations, in the first account in Revelation 6, we're talking about a false prophet. And really what happened is you get famine, you get war, you get death. And well, that's emblematic of the last 5 years, wouldn't you agree, from COVID until Trump came back into office? And it would seem to me that would fit Revelation 6. So what is this about? When we're talking about this one, we're talking about aligning with God so that God can have his glory, so God could be the ultimate victor over evil. And if we're aligned with God, that can happen. Satan can't win. So I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm pretty over the moon about this. I hope you guys like it. You have to let me know. And I know for some it's like, this is pie in the sky stuff. Oh, no, it's not. I know it's not. So we left off lifting the veil. Very nice. I like that. We left off with the story of the three popes when I said that, hear me out. I think you're going to be very impressed with some of the things that I've uncovered. You're going to be very impressed with the story as it happens. We've got these three popes here. We got Pope John Paul II. We've got Pope Benedict the 16th, and we've got Pope Francis. If you go through the Q post, Q's told you several times, you've got to look at the number 2. The number 2 tends to be the person who affects the operations. So under President Trump, the number 2 is actually the Secretary of State. He affects foreign policy for the president's policy. In any agency, the number 2 is pretty much the chief operations officer. In the Vatican, it's no different. the Pope is the chief executive. Their number two is pretty much the chief operations officer. And under Pope John Paul II, that was Cardinal Sodano. Under Benedict, that was Cardinal Bertone. And under Francis, that was Cardinal Parolin. And I want you to get to know these names because they're important to the story as we go through this today. Sodano is an Italian, Bertone is an Italian, Parolin is also Italian, but he's got a different background. So I'm just going to bring that in because back in the late 1500s, early 1600s, we had these apparitions. For those of you who are Catholic, you know what I'm talking about. This is when the Holy Mother comes to a person or persons and gives them messages. In this instance, she came to a faithful. Her name was Mother Mariana. She was a nun in Quito, Ecuador. And she, for several years, gave these prophecies. In one of the prophecies, she said Masonic sects, having infiltrated all the social classes, would subtly introduce its teaching into domestic ambiances in order to corrupt the children, and the devil would glory in dining upon the exquisite delicacy of the hearts of children and the assault of childhood innocence. Also, she made the comment, woe to those of the 20th century. I repeat, woe to those who will cause these things to come about. They will tremble before the dread judgment seat of God. Moreover, great calamities will befall the people throughout the epoch. The prayers of the faithful religious will be powerful in holding back the arm of divine justice. Keep thought on that last sentence because yes, Chris Taylor, the first show I did on Monday on Feisty's Digs, it was a teaser, and yesterday I did it at Beer at the Parade. If you look into the description of this video, you will see those two links if you missed it. Anyway, we've got here, she's saying that the latter part of the 20th century is going to be important to take note of. I'm going to point out something else that happened. I showed this on Monday. This is in June of 1917, where the Masons, remember she said a sect of Masons would take over the Vatican. The Masons were marching through St. Peter's Square saying Satan must reign in the Vatican, the Pope will be a slave. That changed on May 8th of this year when we had a marching band where they were playing YMCA, which was really cool. So she said on January 21st, 1610, Satan will almost completely reign by means of Masonic sects. So, and just to understand, she said that 100 years before that sect of Masons was even formed. The sect of Masons she's referring to are the theoretical Masons, where they talk the speculative kind of nature of life. They came out in 1717 from a pub in England. So we're talking 100 years, 107 years before that happens. So that's an important thing to note because it kind of fulfills the fact that the 20th century was going to be a very big time. So when we talk about this particular event, in light of today, you can't talk about it without talking about what was going on at the same time as the Masons marching through the Vatican, and that was the apparitions at Fatima, where the Holy Mother came to 3 small children. Just so you know, the 2 smaller children died of the Spanish flu within the next year. That left Sister Lucia. She's the one that survived, and she lived for quite a while, and she actually, at the request of the Pope, penned all 3 of the apparitions that they were given to paper. And in 1958, she handed in the 3rd apparition and told them that it had to be released to the public by 1960. When they asked her about the date, she said because it will be understood. So when you look at the 3rd apparition, she's saying that even though it wasn't revealed to the public until 2000, they tied it to Pope John Paul's shooting in 1981, which doesn't even make sense. it wouldn't have been made known in 1960. But she also talked about the need to consecrate Russia because Russia would spread her ills. Well, we're talking communism. And so why was 1960 important? Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Hold on. 1960 is important because in 1959, the Berlin Wall was completed. That's why she said it would be understood. So here we have these messages coming out. When Pope John Paul II did get shot, the bullet perfectly fit. It's right here in the crown of the statue at Fatima, Portugal. So I think this is pretty cool to see that, especially in light. One of the other things you do is you have to look at, she said that it would be World War I would end, World War II would start. It would be a greater, more bloody war, which it was. But when you go through human history and you start looking at the climate of war throughout history, the 20th century was the bloodiest in history until the 21st century, which was on track to be even bloodier, which is why this is important. So what about Pope John Paul II? He was a Polish cardinal. The Russians allowed him to be elevated to cardinal because he was basically an educated person. He wasn't a learned person. They thought more of a scholar. He wouldn't be a threat to the government, or at least that's what's publicly said. He eventually becomes the Pope in 1978. This is the crowd outside when he's made Pope. What I wanted to point out, though, is that the Vatican has a long history of diplomacy, working behind the scenes for diplomacy. And we find that the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the USSR came to the Vatican as early as 1965, which is quite interesting considering that one of the biggest tasks was to consecrate Russia. And of course, that didn't happen. They couldn't get the prelates around the world to come together. Pope John Paul himself received him twice, once in 79, and that was just before he went to Poland, and then once again in 1985. Once, and that's 2 years before Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, take down that wall." In 79, what ends up happening is you got Lech Walesa was the Solidarity movement started up in 1980, so it did inspire him to do that. But in 79, when he gets to Poland, it's his first trip after being made Pope, 18 million people are there to see him. And what's interesting about that is, do you see any Russian soldiers? I don't. For a country that was supposedly locked behind an iron curtain and spreading her ills around the world, this is a pretty impressive crowd for Poland. That Russia didn't stop. And of course, a year and a half later, we get the Solidarity movement. But here's what's interesting to me. Let me explain the nuance that I think a lot of people miss. Marx is a theory. Lenin, Trotsky, they both agreed with that theory, as did Mao, by the way, in China. They agreed with that theory. Lenin believed in it for Russia. Trotsky believed it should go across the whole world. Well, of course, Lenin, he becomes the top dog, and Trotsky leaves Russia. Where did he go? He went to Mexico, where he was killed. So when she says Russia will spread her ills, she's talking about the scourge of communism, but it's the Trotskyism form of communism, which is the effort to subjugate the entire world, which is what that requires. And so you can see by the time this is happening that we're talking by the 50s and 60s, there is an actual plan to take over the whole world from a power and control perspective. And that's why I wanted to bring that in, and which is why every pope has consistently talked about the unfettered commercialism, unfettered, free societies like that, when you don't have the controls you need over monetary policy, over capitalism, all of that. This is why they keep talking about it. And one of the byproducts of trying to get money is obviously illicit activity, trafficking of people, weapons, money, and the such. So again, I'm going to bring this up again. I brought it up on yesterday and Monday. One of the most favorite sayings for most youth know this saying. If you're under the age of 40, you know this saying probably. Pope John Paul II in 2000, when he held it's an annual worldwide youth conference. When he held that conference, in this particular conference, he kept saying, "Be not afraid." And of course, in 2020, Trump reposts about his birthday, congratulating the 100th anniversary of his birthday. Remember, 2020, he was born in 2020, in 1920. So here we have "Be not afraid" in 2020. This is a big deal, especially, and I'm bringing this slide back up again, when you read the entire blessing in context, where he says, "To his saving power, open the boundaries of states," right here, power, "economic and political systems," money, "and the vast fields of culture, civilization, and development," influence, the three sides of the triangle. When you notice that, when you catch that, it kind of changes the story of everything you're watching, don't you think? So we've got, and for Pope Francis, he's reiterated that twice in 2013 and 2018. He reiterated what Pope John Paul II had said. So this takes us to understanding the first decade of the 21st century, of the 2010s. I showed you pictures before the 20th century was on track. Here we are. Since 2001, there were 106,000 terrorist attacks around the world, way up from the 20th century. The number of attacks actually rose a lot after about 2015. Note the timing, reaching a peak of 13,500 in 2014 before they declined to about 6,700 in 2019. What can you think of changed? I mean, I know what I know was changing, but it's obvious that the less than 10, only 3 non-military, their plan was in full operation, which is what accounts for that decline. And if you don't think that that matters, go back and listen to Trump in Saudi Arabia in May of 2017, where he talks about this. So please understand that we're at the tail end of a story. This is not the beginning, and there's been a lot of good happening despite all the bad being talked about. And that's why I wanted to bring this to here, because in 2014, terrorism is still pretty high. When Putin came to office, he understood the Russia against the West. He understood that they were being used as the, quote, bad guy. He also understood that the West was trying to provoke a conflict between the two nuclear superpowers, the US and Russia. He had sent his ambassador to the Vatican, his foreign minister. He sent him to the Vatican in 2012 to talk to the Pope, and he was rebuffed. He was told, "No, you're not going to talk about Fatima." So Putin came in 2013, soon after, that's when Pope Francis became Pope in March of 2013. So here he is offering some, and he's Orthodox, he's a devout Orthodox, offering a picture of the Madonna, and of course he's reverent. One of the things Putin has said, and he's actually said it more than once, but the earliest I could find it was 2014, where the vision of going to war with a Satanist America terrified the Kremlin. So we've been painted that Russia's the bad guy, and I've been knowing all along they're not. But I think this provides great context for what I'm about to talk about today. And the actual story about the Vatican and understanding the connections starts to come out in the late 50s with the conclave. I showed you that the other day where Zellerbach was actually telling American officials to discreetly exercise their power on American cardinals so they could get their guy in as Pope. Um, so here we are in 1974. You got the Franklin National Bank collapse happened. You know, just $1 billion just disappeared for no reason. His name was Michel Sidona. Sindona is this guy here. He just made off with a bunch of money. When they investigated that, they saw the connection to Lucio Gelli. He ran the P2 propaganda duo Freemason Lodge, and as a result of that investigation, 970 some names were found in that lodge in a raid in 1981, and it forced this guy Adolfo Sarti to have to resign immediately because of his name showing up. He just happened to be the justice minister for Italy. So this is just in the immediate fallout. When they continued to do the research, they found out, well, you know, there's a CIA connection. The CIA actually used Sidono, Cavi, and Archbishop Marcinkus as their go-between, their financial intermediaries. They were sending money through these guys that was being laundered, and what the purpose was originally was in an attempt to overthrow the communist government of Italy. So we can actually see where this is happening. So even if it started for benevolent reasons, one of the things they were doing was creating terrorist attacks throughout Italy. That's never good. So there's always a problem with that. In the raid in 1981, which happened on March 17th, 1981, they come up with this list of names. Let me give you a moment to listen to what happened with Calvi, because I think you'll find that interesting as it relates to the rest of the story.
Early on the morning of the 18th
Can you hear that okay?
a man walking to work in the city of London made a bizarre discovery.
Yeah.
Hanging there under Blackfriars Bridge, he found the body of a man.
I think it's plain.
The body was later identified as that of Roberto Calvi, the head of a large private Italian bank. At first, police in the city of London believed that Calvi had committed suicide, but there is now growing suspicion, especially in Italy, that he was murdered. Calvi was at the center of an incredibly complex web of international fraud and intrigue. It involved the Italian banking world, the underworld, the mafia, Freemasonry, and, most startlingly of all, the Vatican.
Roberto Calvi was the president of the Banco Ambrosiano. His links to the Vatican were so close, he was known as God's banker. But he was a banker in trouble. Last year, he was convicted of illegally exporting a huge sum of money to Switzerland. The Italian police have been investigating his bank ever since, and more charges were expected. The Vatican is directly linked to Roberto Calvi by this man. He's Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the Pope's bodyguard, a governor of the Vatican, and the head of the Vatican Bank. The Archbishop had frequent dealings with Calvi's Banco Ambrosiano involving hundreds of millions of pounds. So close were those links that Marcinkus was even made head of the Banco Ambrosiano's main foreign subsidiary in the Bahamas. Tying them still more closely is the fact that the Vatican Bank is a shareholder in the Banco Ambrosiano. Those links are now highly embarrassing to the Vatican. Before Roberto Calvi disappeared, Italian investigators discovered that $1.5 billion was missing from his bank. Some of that money was lent to South American governments at low interest rates as directed by the Catholic Church. The rest was put into ghost companies in Luxembourg and South America, from where it was returned to Italy to buy shares for Calvi in the Banco Ambrosiano. By this method, he was able to use bank funds to build up his own personal fortune.
Calvi's last journey was hardly that of a man contemplating suicide. Indeed, he had made the most elaborate plans to get out of Italy secretly. He shaved his moustache in order that he would be less easily recognizable. He traveled a very circuitous route via Trieste and Austria, and then, it's believed, by private plane into Britain. He'd taken a 1-month lease on a flat in Chelsea. And then there was a false passport and an airline ticket. Inside the passport was a current visa for Brazil, and the airline ticket was for a one-way trip to Rio de Janeiro. Why, you might ask, go to all those lengths simply to finish up on the end of a rope under Blackfriars Bridge?
There were lots of mysteries in Calvi's life. He was connected not only with the Vatican, not only with politicians, not only with all sorts of very strange type of business, but he was particularly associated with a group of men who were outside the law that they were known as P2, which theoretically was a Masonic lodge.
This is Propaganda 2.
Propaganda 2, indeed, yes. Theoretically was a Masonic lodge, but then practically was something very much associated with mafia and with all sorts of dirty dealings.
But where is the link between that secret organization, Propaganda 2, and Blackfriars Bridge?
So, for example, they say that Fraia calls in Italian fratello, brother, and so these people of the Propaganda 2 call each other in the same way, and this is one thing. The other thing was that they normally, when they meet, these people of Propaganda 2, they all dress in black, like the Black Friars. One of the characteristics of the masonry is the stone. And Calvi had in his pockets 2 immense pieces of stones, which could have been another very strange event, because it was not necessary, neither if he was committed suicide, neither if he was murdered, to put in his pocket stones.
Okay, so what you're getting there is kind of a background. Remember what I just said to you earlier. The Franklin National Bank collapsed in 1974. We get into the story about Calvi because he ran Ambrosiano Bank. Ambrosiano Bank, the largest shareholder was the Vatican Bank, so there's a direct connection. And money was being laundered using the Vatican Bank through Ambrosiano, through Franklin National. So it literally collapsed 2 banks in the end. And so this story ends up, we know, before I go on, we know that the money was being used as what they called the strategy of tension, where Gelly, the P2 Grand Master, was working with the CIA to produce or to induce terrorist attacks all throughout Italy during the 70s. And the goal was to induce chaos and fear, creating a demand for a more right-wing controlled government. So we were going from communism to fascism as a result of what Gelly was doing. Calvi, now the general manager of Banco Ambrosiano, by 1975, he expanded Ambrosiano's interests all around the world with offshore companies, and so that they could move more money out of Italy and around to all these places around the world. So, and again, Marcinkus, because of his role, Marcinkus was, and keep this in mind, this is important, he was what they called the governor of the Vatican. That was the person that is responsible for all the operations at the Vatican, and he was also president of the Vatican Bank, the IOR. So you can see how we have this nice, cozy set of relationships. And unfortunately for all of them, this started to come out. There was a young man, his name was Richard John Branecki, and in 1990 he came forward as a whistleblower saying, hey, the CIA was involved in financing the terrorism that was going on in Italy. And of course, our favorite senator, Senator Kerry, headed the hearings on that, and they threw it out based on the fact that, quote, you're not a CIA employee, you're a contractor. So they kind of whitewashed him. And they then said that what this guy was involved in, it was all about, everything that was going on was about the strategy of the October surprise to make sure that Reagan got another term as president. As we know now, that's not true. So anyway, I explained it before. Since 1717, Freemasonry added a thought to its process. Up until 1717, Freemasonry was operative. They were stone masons, right? This is, think Calvi, he's hanging from the bridge with the stones in his pocket, large stones, by the way, because he did not kill himself. Anyway, in 1770, they added the whole idea of speculative masonry, and this is where the whole idea of secret societies start to come in. And this is important because while you've got leaders around the world working towards peace, you've got this faction in the shadows trying to prevent it from happening. Why? Because chaos makes money. It also creates a power vacuum that you can take over, and it subjugates in the end, and you have more power and more control, and you're wealthier. So there are consequences for peace-driven leaders. And these are just two people. In 1951, you have the King of Jordan is assassinated. What was he doing? He had a vision for regional peace. And Yitzhak Rabin, again, he was, that's the Oslo Accords, again, peace deals. He was assassinated in 1995. You can see we've got a long history of, oh no, there will not be peace. In 1981, Anwar Sadat was murdered, but it was after two other attempted assassinations. But he, again, we're talking about, he was the first leader in the region to officially recognize Israel as a state, and he was being called a traitor. There was an actual fatwa put out on his life. The guy that put out the fatwa was later convicted for his role in the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. So you can see we're bringing it full circle. But according to Reagan, when Anwar Sadat was murdered, America has lost a close friend. The world has lost a great statesman, and mankind has lost a champion of peace. And that brings us to 1981. What's interesting is the propaganda duo Lodge was raided on March 17th. On March 30th, Reagan's shot, almost killed. On May 13th, the anniversary of the first apparition of Fatima, the Pope is shot, almost killed. And of course, October 6th, Anwar Sadat is murdered. And what did Trump always say? He used to say all the time, I studied history. And I found a post where he put out, if history teaches us anything, it's that strong nations require strong leaders with clearly defined national borders. I can't find the rest of the post. But what we have here is a dynamic here where you've got those that are seeking peace, the leaders of the countries, versus those that don't want anything to do with peace. And that's obviously the shadow government around the world that we saw being built with Banco Ambrosiano and the Vatican Bank, so as the mediaries. So I wanted to bring this up because it brings us into another set of Q posts. If you look at post 154, it has an interesting comment in there. Perhaps someday people will understand they, with single quotes, they had a plan to conduct another mass extinction event. He ends the post by reciting the Our Father. Later on says which version. It uses the term trespasses. There's four religions that use trespasses: Catholics, Lutherans, Anglicans, Methodists, which is interesting. And obviously we're talking about the Vatican, right? We're talking about the Catholic version. Why? Because unlike all these other religions, the Vatican is both a country and a state, and it has a money transmission service, which is the Vatican Bank. It's not really a bank, but nevertheless. And he's asking which version. He points out Godfather 3, which is about money laundering. So he's saying laundered money through the Vatican to where? He asks who financed 9/11. When you look at that, when you dig into that, I don't know anybody. I'm not getting into planes versus missiles or any of that other stuff. I've always been interested in the machine that caused that to happen. And it's obvious it was there was an inside job element to the taking down of the 9/11 event. So if you've got an inside job and you know you've got foreign money being laundered out of Saudi Arabia, probably other countries, through the Vatican Bank to the CIA to affect 9/11, then you've got to ask yourself the question, are we going to survive this, right? So he also tells us at the end of the repost that this is a marker and wants us to learn to read the map. And I really do think what we're referring to here is that bigger than Watergate, 1,000 times bigger than Watergate story that you also hear a lot about, and I'll explain why. And this is a deposition that was given, as you see, June 14th, 2018. The deposition was given about 9/11. This is the individual giving the deposition is Kenneth Williams. Kenneth Williams is talking about how in 1999 he had opened an investigation because he figured out that there were some Saudi nationals that were living in Phoenix. This became known as the Phoenix Memo, by the way. They were living in Phoenix, and he knew that they were extremists, and he thought, based on their activity, that they were preparing to hijack planes because they were learning to fly without land. You know, you've heard the story. He sent a letter to Maine Justice and to the FBI saying, hey, the purpose of this communication is to advise the Bureau and New York the possibility of a coordinated effort by Osama bin Laden to send students to the United States to attend civil aviation universities and colleges. These individuals will be in a position in the future to conduct terror activity against civil aviation targets. Mind you, this is in a deposition in 2018, so obviously we're not done with this. The person that it's sent to, the guy's name is Thomas Picard. Well, remember I told you, think the number 2, right? He was the number 2 at the FBI. When this letter got there, the number 2 did not share it, evidently. When Director Louis Free just resigned, he then takes over the director's position, and he held that position until Robert Mueller took the job. He was put into place on September 4th, 2001. So that key time frame between the sending of the letter and Mueller taking the post, the guy that was running that is Thomas Picard. And so that's, again, that number 2 story that we keep talking about. I'm going to take it a step further. He wanted to do the interviews for the of these terrorists when they were apprehended, and they were forbidden. They not only did they not hear anything, but they used somebody else to do the actual interviews of the terrorists. He never found out about it, and he's complaining about it in this letter. His request was denied. In fact, I never received a response. The person who did that, I don't know how many of you remember this, but in 2023, we find out that the FBI agent who shot and killed the dog was not going to have any charges against her. And then quietly in October of 24, she's made the executive assistant director of the science and technology branch. So let me just step you back for a second. If you're putting in all your embeds into position, this is October 24th of 2024. They know Trump is going to win. It was already evident. We're embedding here. This is, remember, the entrenched and fortified. Her name is Jacqueline McGuire. So she's one of many. You're going to hear that name again. I'm pretty sure of it. But he ended up retiring and leaving government. There is other litigation involving the U.S. government going on, and any cooperation by you may negatively impact the case. The Trump administration is trying to have a good relation with Saudi Arabia, and they do not want you to give a deposition or cooperate with counsel for the families, because he regretted not doing that interview, but the Trump administration has said, please step back, saying that there is other litigation involving the U.S. government going on. So again, we have another insight into the fact that this story from 9/11, which predates to 1998-99, today, as of June 14th, 2018, was still active. And when Trump says, yeah, he'll release the 9/11 files, that hopefully you're starting to get an understanding of what's taken so long. Again, in July 20th of 2021, we get new evidence that says that the hijackers, several of them were CIA agents. That's also new information. I have to laugh about this one. This came out in 21 because RT is the one that said CIA agents. Our media says a US-based support network. You see how they play with words. So if you know that everything is connected going backwards to what I showed you about the P2 raid, the Banco Embragiano, the Franklin National Bank collapse, and the Vatican Bank and how that worked, and we'll get more into that. And you start to understand that that is a financial network that was used to affect acts of terrorism all around the world. You can start to understand why there were so many 160,000 terrorist attacks beginning in the 21st century. Hopefully I've explained that to the point. And before I move on, because I don't know where you guys are, and I can't keep up with the comments and do these slides. So if anybody's got something I missed, please put it in now so that I can answer that before we keep moving on. Because I got a lot more. We got 40 some slides to go through, 49. And while I wait, I'm just going to go through this one. This brings me to this post, which is an interesting post. This is post 298, and you start from the bottom and go up in this post, okay? It's the picture of Bush 2 with Prince Bandar on August 27th, 2002, to the Al-Walid with the Queen in June of 2003, with Al-Walid and Assad in March of 2006. These dates represent all the onslaughts against Assad until Assad falls in December of 2024. And of course, we got the spider. What are the spiders representing? The spiders are the Marxists, the communist group that is trying to take over the world. This is Ukraine's story. This is the Gaza story. This is most of the stories. These terrorist elements are actually what they call queer Marxists. No, that's not related to sex or gender. They're anarchists for the sole purpose of bringing in a fascist government. So why did I bring this out? Well, when I started researching, and remember, we've got the king and Bush 2 holding hands. So there's a support system here. When I started digging into this, I find out, and it looks to me he's giving information. Coming back to the Queen, in June of 2003, we find out that her solicitor, her lawyer, is actually managing the assets of Rifat al-Assad. That is Bashar al-Assad's uncle. So we've got a connection here, which I find interesting. And who seems to be giving her that information? None other than Prince al-Walid himself. So keep coming down into this, and I realized there's other things going on. I think you all remember the raid on November 1st, 2017, where all of those individuals in Saudi Arabia were arrested and detained. Al-Walid was one of those, by the way, held in the Ritz-Carlton. That raid were generally the Wahhabists who were in government and their support system, business leaders and such like that. They were all apprehended. When King Salman ascended to the throne, the first thing he did was throw out the Wahhabists from central government. Now we've got this massive arrest. What's interesting is Al-Walid, they call him Trump calls him the dopey pope, right? Al-Walid gets out of that prison. He forfeited some $5 billion. But in March of 2018, he's looking for a way to make money again. And he routinely talks about the fact that he will not disclose the conditions of his release. There's an agreement that he made with the Saudi government. He will not disclose it. I have a feeling we're going to start to hear some of those answers if, in fact, we get the video or the documents that Trump is talking about. Nevertheless, we find out that the Saudi crown prince before MBS, he was under house arrest in 2017, but in 2020 he was actually apprehended or detained. He's in jail right now on charges of treason, and nobody's heard from him since. So I'm not sure if he's alive or dead. And Trump has actually kind of half-heartedly said, well, you ought to release him. But nevertheless, he's now out of commission. I'm thinking, and this is my thinking, let me caveat, I don't have anything to prove it. I'm thinking there's your 9/11 money right there. This is the person who actually forwarded the money to the U.S. Now, why was he brought up on treason in 2020? Because he wanted to overthrow the Saudi government that is there now. I'm thinking notice he's with Kerry, who whitewashed what happened with the propaganda duo raid. We've got a meeting here with both Barr and Hillary Clinton. I'm just going to wait on this, but I think there's more here. But it comes down to, in my mind, 9/11, which brings us to the video where Trump is asked directly, are you going to release this stuff?
Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify the 9?
Oops, let me go back. He says he'll declassify the 9/11 files. Now, just think logically. You don't declassify files that are in active litigation. If he's talking about releasing them and declassifying them, he's talking about adjudicated cases. And I think this is why this has taken so long. Also going to point to a set of tweets he put out in 2018. I've held on to these all these years, where he said he met with DOJ concerning the declassification of various unredacted documents. They agreed to release them, but stated that so doing may have a perceived negative impact on the Russia probe. Remember, what was John Durham's mandate? His mandate was to investigate the source of the Russia probe. Also, key allies called to ask not to release. Therefore, the Inspector General has been asked to review these documents on an expedited basis. I believe he will move quickly on this, and hopefully other things which he is looking at. In the end, I can always declassify if it proves necessary. Speed is very important to me and to everyone. So what is this set of tweets about? He's reminding, remember this is 2018, we got the midterms coming up. He's reminding all of his partners, hey, remember we all took the oath. We are all working on this. He's telling his partners, his allies, you better keep going. Keep going because we got to get this done. Not sure what would have stalled it back then, but he's putting out a definite signal. Do not stop, fall back on what we're here for. So that said, I'm going to get into the Vatican deck now that I've given you some history. Hopefully, you now understand some of the geopolitical nuances of the time. The worst thing we can do is what we tend to do is we look at yesterday's lens through today's experience. I need you to think of yesterday's lens through yesterday's experience when we go through the Vatican. So it will make a lot more sense as we go through this. So the first time in history, Q says that one side of the triangle removed, first time in history. That is the Vatican. The Vatican itself had never been audited. It was not a part of the Interpol system, which it became a part of Interpol in 2008. They started auditing in July of 2013. I love the date, July 4th, 2013. It allowed investigators from Interpol to access the Vatican archives, which are the private files of the Pope. And I don't have that in here. Oh, no, because I'm not at the end of Francis. Okay, but these are the private files of the Pope. There's two archives. There's a more public archive. And by the way, secrete doesn't mean secret, it means private. And Pope Francis changed the word to read private more explicitly because people think it's secret, and it's not. It's like if you wanted to come see my thousands of books that I've got, you better ask my permission first, or you're leaving it in a body bag. These are the property of the Vatican. They are cared for better than anything else. History proves that it is necessary to do that. We've seen major libraries in the effort of conquest be burned to the ground, some taking many days to do because of the thousands of artifacts that are in that library. So the Vatican stores the more public library in the Castle of the Holy Angels, which is down the road, which used to be a prison, by the way, an impenetrable prison. And then there's another set of archives that are kept in the papal residence, which are in the main part of the Vatican. That he lives here. That set of private archives are the Pope's documents, and the previous Pope's documents, well, the Pope himself, his documents are kept secret. When he passes on, they are kept secret for a, quote, period of time, kind of like our own for a number of years before they are released. When they entered the Interpol network, it gave them access to Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and then, of course, when Pope Francis gave them access to his stuff. But what they were doing is our investigations. And by the way, yes, teaser, or I guess this is to lead it out. But one of the first things Pope Leo did was unlock the papal apartments for the first time in 13 years. Pope Francis never lived in the papal apartments. It was kind of hard to live there when it's crawling with Interpol investigators. Anyway, they were investigating all of the scandal. And if you remember the marker I showed you that Q was talking about, we find out that the Vatican holds a key to many of the answers that they needed for these geopolitical targets around the world. So largely the story started in 2004 with the battle between good and evil. It's being waged not just against the Catholic Church, but the whole world, but this particular part of the story, because disrupting the money flow is the beginning of the end for weaponization of the monetary system. Let me explain. After 2001, they had the 9/11 Commission. That's the 28 pages we never got. One of the things that came out of that is that money was being laundered, and we get that proof in the Q post, was being laundered through the Vatican. In 2005, Pope John Paul II passes on. Pope Benedict comes into office. He is admittedly not a very good leader for a government. He's more of a theologian, but nevertheless, immediately we start seeing things happening at the Vatican. Remember in 2007, we got Directive 51 is signed by Bush II. And what is that? It's a continuity of government in the event of an existential threat against our government. 2008, Obama comes into office. He carries on Directive 51. He repeals part of it. That's the part where all the agencies had to determine essential and non-essential, which you're seeing play out right now. But then he added what is called PPD 40, which to this day is under seal. We don't know the contents of that. But PPD, Presidential Directive 51, lays the foundation to determine who's essential, who's non-essential, and there's 4 categories. And then from there, you develop a plan of continuity should an existential threat hit our country. And it's been carried on. The work has carried on. For those of you who know, I have a continuity of government channel stood up on Telegram where I lay all this out. Nevertheless, that story starts back with the commission report. In 2008, remember, I'll show you in a minute, but we get into the Interpol network at the Vatican, and soon after, Brulhart is hired by the Vatican to audit the bank. Keep coming through, though, and connect it with other things that are happening. What else happened in 2008? We had the monetary crash. And we all are rabid users. I can't find my phone. We're all rabid users of this new invention called the smartphone. Whoop, there it goes. There it is. Smartphone. We all use the smartphone. That didn't come out until 2009, same time as Bitcoin came out. Are you starting to connect a dot? In 2010 and 11, there's negotiations to bring Egmont on. 2013, they start auditing the bank. So, and wait till you see the story behind that. But this is basically the encapsulated version of that history. Let me keep going. So, of course, Pope John Paul II dies in April of 2005. Gianni joins the Gendarmeria in 2000. He's working for Vigano. Well, not originally Vigano, but he's working for Vigano. He is the personal bodyguard for Benedict and Francis, because obviously when he gets here, it's right after that the Pope dies. But he's now the personal bodyguard for these 2 popes. That's what this Q post 1413 is about. Guardian of the Pope, personal, Domenico Gianni. Like I said, he works for Vigano. They bring him into the Interpol in 2008, and they bring in René Brulhart from Egmont. Egmont works with the financial forensics teams of Europe. Egmont is a financial forensics group, and their sole purpose is to trace and track money laundering, terrorism financing, counterfeiting, all of that stuff. From what these findings are from these audits, you get what they call the FATF standards, which every monetary system around the world must follow to prevent money laundering. So when it says Pope will be having a terrible May, those who backed him would be pushed into the light, everybody forgets this second line. Please, I don't know why, but that's a very important line. Going back to the number 2, right? Those that backed him, conclave, those that backed him will be pushed into the light, cardinals. So we're dark to light and truth, and this is P equals Pope, comes out in post 997. So keep that in mind as we go through this, because these are important to the grand scheme of things. So when we're talking about Gianni, you can't talk about Gianni without talking about Vigano. The two are very much entwined. You got the IOR, you got Interpol, you got the ASIF, which is the Supervisory Financial Information Authority of the Vatican, and you got Rene Brulhart, who comes in to do the auditing. These are really pretty big deals when you think of the grand scheme of things, and I will show you how Francis and Benedict are actually working very closely together. And I'm not going to show you that today. Just keep that in mind. They were very much working closely together. The story at the Vatican actually begins in 2008, and it's not just from the priest abuse report, the grand jury report that came out of the U.S. There's also a young man named Richard Sipe, who wrote an open letter to the Pope about priest abuse. This letter was from April 22nd, 2008, and it highlighted not just the pattern in practice, but how they would move prelates around to cover up the abuses, to hide it. And Pope Benedict in 2010, and he always recognized this is real, the Vatican entered the Interpol network right after this letter. So take the hint. This is not an accident. There's a George Jorg. He's a German prelate. He was the top aide to Pope Francis. He referred to the clerical sex abuse case as the Vatican's 9/11, not for the number of dead, but because it was such a profound and catastrophic scandal for the church, just like our 9/11 scandal is. So this kind of starts out the gate as now you've got Pope Benedict XVI. This is his beginning of his papacy, 3 years in. One of the first things they did was they, of course, joined Interpol in 2008 right after that. And then you've got Scarano, who was actually arrested and is doing time in prison for money laundering and sex abuse. Oh, go figure. This is right afterwards where Scarano himself, let me see, he worked for the Vatican's financial administration. He was dubbed as Don 500. He was arrested on Friday, well, according to the article, by the Italian police. He was from Salerno, Italy. He had been suspended about a month before his arrest when they learned about the investigation of his activities. He was they tried to cover it up, but it wasn't working. And before I go any further, I've got to go backwards. I'm going to forget again, aren't I? Gosh, I am so thankful for you guys. Menexum, am I right? Thank you for the $20. Thank you, Ginger, because 5 subscriptions. You guys are wonderful. I appreciate everything you guys are doing for me. I am Taylor. You're now a monthly supporter. Wow, I got my first subscription like that. Thank you. And is Parallel 8 Media. Is that Mark? You're now a monthly subscriber. Thank you. And then, of course, you gave $5 rant. So I appreciate you guys so much. I really do. Thank you. So now we've got the Gunda Maria very much invested in cleaning out what's going on at the Vatican. Mind you, this is during Benedict XVI. And it gets better. It gets so much better that you got that question, wait a minute, maybe I got everything wrong. In 2009, Pope Benedict goes to the site where Pope Celestine is buried, and he leaves his stole. You have to understand the history here. Pope Celestine is the only other pope in history to resign, and he didn't resign voluntarily. He was under duress. Why? Because King Charles was trying to take over the Vatican, so he resigned. When he was made pope, the thought was they needed to get rid of the corruption in the Vatican, and they hired this hermit, literally out of the mountains, to become pope because they thought he would be unattached and therefore unaffected by the corruption. Within 5 months, he realized he couldn't handle that. So here we have Pope Benedict leaving his stole. In other words, throwing it in, right? You throw it in, you give up. So this is in 2009, which is interesting. There's a book I just got that has me so excited. I cannot, there you go. Francis Among the Wolves. It's called The Inside Story of a Revolution. Fantastic book. I love this book. I can't put it down. Nevertheless, in this book, I find out some very interesting information. In 2010, Pope Benedict had confided that in the presence of danger, one cannot flee. One, however, may resign. So it leaves the illusion that he was afraid. No. He wanted to sweep the board clear of all entrenched positions of power in the Curia. By resigning, he triggered the automatic resignation as stipulated by Canon Law 335 and 340 of the other principal office holders of the Church's central government. De facto, his decision to abdicate amounted to a sort of coup d'etat and reboot of the Vatican. Is that cool or what? I love this. I love the fact that years of research, I just a week ago found out I was over the target. Can't get any better than that. So when you understand what's been going on, the number twos in the Vatican and how everything is being controlled, and you start to realize that the Pope is powerless to handle it all by himself. So for Benedict, it gets even worse because what we find out is he set up things for his successor. In 2010, they signed an agreement with the EU to use the euro. In so doing, they have to follow the rules on combating counterfeiting, but predominantly money laundering and terrorist financing. Gee, does that sound like something Iowa was involved in? And who's doing this in 2010? You're talking Vigano and Gianni. They're the ones behind this. And ASIF carries out its institutional activity in accordance with inter alia, which is a law of 8 October 2013. It is composed of 3 units: the Supervision Unit, the Regulation and Legal Affairs Unit, and the Financial Intelligence Unit. Hello. So there are now legal relations. When they started doing this, there's starting to be consternation within the Curia, and but Pope Benedict continues to go on. He continues to work through this. In 2010, he puts out a motu proprio, which was for the prevention and countering of illegal activities in the area of monetary and financial dealings. Basically sets up the AISF. Unfortunately, it wasn't strong enough. And I think everybody knew that when his successor came in, he kind of left it open, right? Because he knew he was going to be leaving. When his successor came in, Pope Francis actually strengthened it in 2013. Both of these are in 2013. The first one is in August and then in November again, as he's making changes to the people on the board. I'll get into that in the next show. So when did we first find out about all of this? 2011. What they're finding, and I'm going to go back 2 slides so you can see what I'm talking about. What they're finding as they're getting this pulled together is there's unrest starting to happen. The natives were getting very restless within the Vatican. And as a Result of that, Vigano was fired by Cardinal Bertone, who was the Secretary of State, and he's sent to the U.S. as nuncio, which gets even better. Nevertheless, once he gets to the U.S., he releases information that says, hey, 3 times I tried to write Cardinal Bertone and Pope Benedict. 3 times I was rebuffed and nobody said anything. And he puts this all out. And I forgot that slide saying he's telling the truth. I'll do it again later. But nevertheless, he puts this out. Bertone gets angry. He tries to grab control of what just happened, telling everybody, before you publish anything, you got to run it through me. Kind of like now, you got to run it through the Secretary of State and his minions to approve an apparition. I'll get that in a minute. But he's saying you got to run it through me, and he immediately tries to crack down on it. Vigano is sent to the U.S. as nuncio. He actually tried to stop. He tried to prevent that from happening. He goes to Pope Benedict, and Pope Benedict says, look, I need you to do something for me. I need you to investigate McCarrick. You know that document is the August 2018 testimony he released. So he investigates McCarrick when he comes to the U.S. Well, let me explain why he could. Because in the Vatican, they don't have a CIA. They don't have an FBI. They have a nuncio. The nuncio is a de facto CIA for the Vatican. So as nuncio, he came here to investigate McCarrick, which is really cool because when Bertone did what he did by firing him, suddenly in 2012, we have a conversation going on in the restaurant with a bunch of documents in a car that is telling you about all of this. It gets published by Fittipaldi. The Vatican goes after him for treason. Let me play this soundbite. You'll like this.
Now to the Vatican, which is embroiled in another scandal. 2 books coming out this week allege long-running financial mismanagement at the Holy See. Most of the reporting is based on confidential sources. Vatican watchers say Pope Francis is facing strong opposition to his efforts to bring austerity and transparency to church finances. NPR's Silvia Poggioli joins us now from Rome. And Silvia, what exactly are the books alleging here?
Well, they both contain revelations of waste and mismanagement at the Vatican. Today, the author of Avarice, Emiliano Fittipaldi, told reporters that Pope Francis's efforts are going very slowly, that there's a lot of opposition from his cardinals, many of whom oppose his vision of a poor church for the poor. He says the Vatican acts like a merchant bank.
Like a merchant bank. What would be examples of that?
Well, he said Peter's Pence, which is the fund of charitable offerings made by churches all over the world to help the poor. In 2013, it raised close to $400,000, but that sum didn't go to charity. It covered the expenses of the Curia. And Fittipaldi claims that the Vatican Bank, with its sleazy past as a money laundering machine and offshore bank for Italian tax evaders, is still behind in full transparency. And then coincidentally, this weekend, 2 people, a priest and a laywoman, both of whom worked at the Vatican, were arrested for allegedly leaking confidential documents.
Sylvia, this isn't the first time that the Vatican has faced embarrassing allegations of mismanagement and waste. I want you to remind us of the VatiLeaks scandal of 2012.
Well, it started with a book by Gianluigi Nuzzi. It was also based on leaked documents, and it also revealed corruption and fraud at the Vatican. And it gave the name, as you said, to VatiLeaks, the scandal, and that may have triggered Pope Benedict's resignation. Nuzzi is the author of the second book that's coming out. Incidentally, it'll be coming out also in English this week. And publishers' releases in Italian media reports say it reveals the lavish lifestyles of some cardinals and the Vatican's huge real estate holdings. And it's based mainly on emails, minutes of meetings, and most surprising, secretly recorded conversations of the Pope himself. In one, Francis allegedly lets his anger at waste and mismanagement of Vatican finances be known, saying costs are out of control. And in another, he allegedly says, if we don't know how to safeguard our money, which can be seen, how can we safeguard the souls of the faithful, which are invisible?
Well, what does this say about Pope Francis's effort to reform the Church's management of its wealth?
Well, the authors insist they don't want to harm the Pope, but the Vatican reacted very angrily when it announced the arrest of the Spanish Monsignor and the lay woman public relations expert. The Vatican said, and I quote, "Publications of this kind do not contribute in any way to establish clarity and truth, but rather to create confusion and partial and tendentious interpretations," end quote. It also said it might take legal action to try to block publication of the books. But the arrest seemed to be a preemptive move by the Vatican to play down potentially damaging revelations. From the information available, it seems to me the books are much more damaging to Francis's opponents than to him. The question is, will the anti-Francis forces fight back even more, or will they be weakened?
Okay, thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Robert.
That's NPR's Silvio Poggioli in Rome.
So you caught that, did you? That the leaks, both in 2012 and again in 2015, the leaks about the criminality going on at the Vatican were more damaging to the Pope's opponents than it was to the Pope. So again, we're getting a reframe here. Why? Because you're talking about the Curia that is handling all of this. They're the mismanagement of that. Why do I keep pointing out Bertone? Bertone is Secretary of State. There are 4 offices in the Secretary of State's office. Office number 1 is where the Vatican Bank money was managed. So this article, unfortunately, I'm glad I got this much information on it, but it's now been pulled. And because the article was so long, all I did was put in 2 slides worth of bullet points of things he was saying in the article. So this is all I've got left of it. I can't show you or prove to you other than it is a real article because it's right there. It was produced on November 3rd of 2015 is when it was put out. One of the things they say in here is he has to know a lot of things he doesn't know because nobody tells them. One of the big issues with 9/11 that came out of the 9/11 report was that information about the pending terrorist attack and all of the intel that was gathered about it was being withheld from the presidential daily brief. In fact, the CIA admitted that they withheld all that information. As a result of that, we got a law in 2004 that established the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. You know that person is Tulsi Gabbard today. With the idea of removing all authority for the CIA to put together the presidential daily brief. It now comes from the ODNI. So here we have the same situation going on at the Vatican. I can't impress upon you enough that you got a dual shadow government and deep state. And like I pointed out the other day, the reason why Vigano keeps talking about the conciliar church is if you read the documents of Vatican II, you can see where, although I can't speak to whether or not it's intended that they were weak. There are some weaknesses in the documents where you can see with the lens of what you know today, right? You can't look at history in the lens of today. But if you look at the history in this case, with what you know today, go back and read those documents and it becomes clear, okay, they leveraged that to insert a shadow government and a deep state. This is why Vigano is so upset about the conciliar church. Everything since Vatican II then is done by the cardinals, and he claims, and I don't know, I question whether he's valid, but and I'll explain why, but he claims that every pope since then is illegitimate because there's this plan to bring in the pope. The cardinals get together to decide who they're going to elect as pope, which is true, but he's saying that it's being done in a nefarious way. So I'm going to scroll through these pretty quick. The IOR has not yet been cleaned up. Abusive customers are still hiding inside the tower. Mob investigated in Italy for serious crimes. The Vatican has never given your Bank of Italy investigators the list of those who ran away with the spoils abroad. And I think that's changed. This is 2015. He must know that to make a saint, to become blessed or blessed, one must pay. In other words, people are paying to be made a saint. This alludes to Mother Teresa. It alludes to Padre Pio. It alludes to several people, to include Pope John Paul II, as to whether or not there was some funny business going on that made them a saint. Shelling out money. Miracle hunters are expensive. They are lawyers. They want hundreds of thousands of euros. I have evidence. So this is getting back to what caused the Protestant Reformation, if you think about it. Talking about Cardinal Pell. Now, this ended up in a government inquiry into pedophilia in Australia. Some witnesses call him a sociopath. In Italy, nobody writes nothing. That's because they were under a gag order. But the story of Cardinal Pell I'll get into in our next set of documents, but that's a pretty long and drawn-out story. He also says here, the American auditing firm, he's referring to Deloitte Touche, the American auditing firm of us called to check the Vatican accounts paid a $10 million fine for softening the reports of Standard Chartered, a British bank. So when he's saying is Deloitte can't be trusted to audit the bank. He just goes through and he's making all these accusations. Like I said, this is in a restaurant in 2012. It got printed into or reported in a book called Avarice from Fittipaldi in 2015. But it started with Nuzzi in 2012 when he first put his book out. And the reason why I brought that up is because she mentions Nuzzi. But Nuzzi, the Vatican hierarchy, was going to try for treason for printing this. In Italian, they put out the Pope's secret papers. In English, it became Ratzinger Was Afraid. You see how we use titles to sway our attention. But it doesn't, even though you've got this in here, rather than focus on the content of the book that the papacy faced, it focused on who leaked the information and how fear was why Benedict resigned his papacy. But I'm telling you, I got proof now. No, that's not true. So the person who was found guilty for the Vati leaks is the government's butler. I mean, not government, Pope Benedict's butler. It looks like Tarcisio Bertone is the person that orchestrated that. This is, look at 2009, Italian police launched money laundering investigation into the bank. That's because they're coming around from what, this is ongoing since 74 with the Franklin National, then Ambrosiano, and then we're coming into, they're going into more and more criminal investigations in Italy. And now that they're part of, since 2008, a part of Interpol, now you've got the world interested in what's going on. These are released because every place that Benedict and Vigano tried to put things in place to aid in these investigations, it was being stopped. They had this huge pushback from inside the church, and the ringleader is Tertio Bertone. So Vati links, what's interesting is it goes all the way back to the 70s with this young girl named Emanuela. She was murdered. She was 15 years old, and it is widely believed she was murdered as a threat to somebody. In fact, they say that she's buried with the guy that murdered her. So we'll find out. They did open up, or they did do a screening of the coffin and said that there are bones in there that do not belong to this guy. So it's a cold case, but it really is interesting that it's coming up in the Vati leaks investigation. One of the other things Benedict did in his preparation for leaving in 2012, he gets 3 archbishops or cardinals. He gets 3 cardinals to do an investigation. All 3 of them are over the age of 80, so they won't be in the next conclave. They have no vested interest, and there's nothing that prevents them from doing this. They're tasked with looking into all the criminality that's now being reported widely. Not only did you have Richard Sipes, now you got Vigano saying, hey, I've been telling you there's this stuff going on. And of course, the Pope's not being made known. None of this is being made known. And now that Vigano went to Benedict and said, look, they're trying to defame me. They want me out of my job as governor of the Vatican. His job was to deal with what was going on at the bank, those investigations. And Benedict says to him, well, go investigate McCarrick. And then he initiates this investigation. That investigation, information about it was released. It's just a coinkydink that it was released less than a month after Vigano releases his 18-page testimony about what's going on. And I didn't bring that part in here. I will do that later. But I wanted to point out this is the result of that investigation by those three cardinals. It's a 300-page dossier. When he read it, he said, "This is beyond my papacy." And he prepared it for his successor. He got this report in December of 2012. He resigned in 2013, but we knew in 2012 he was going to resign. One of the last things Benedict did was to pardon Paolo, his butler, and so Paolo's now free, but he pardoned him just before Christmas. The guy who, quote, stole the documents. Again, I'm seeing this coordination happening for everything that the Vatican deep state was doing. They were actually doing a lot themselves, and it put in place something that wasn't going to be finished under Benedict. Benedict himself recognized, he'd said it a few times, he recognized he's a theologian, and this is his calling. That when it came to governance, the practical side of governance, he sucked at it. He said that himself. And so he said that the end of his papacy, he saw the church turning in on itself and falling prey to desperation because people were needing to keep things covered up. And he knew for more than a half a century the possibility of an abdication coming, because all the popes before him, find out Pope John Paul did it, all of these popes before him actually thought about abdicating the role as pope. They ended up not doing it, but he knew this. So in the Last Testaments, a book that was written for him, it was put out in 2016. The emphasis on his scholarly nature prior to becoming Pope, Ratzinger was a highly respected theologian and author. In the quote, he characterizes himself as a professor, highlighting his identity as a scholar who engages with complex theological and spiritual ideas. In reality, he says, I am more a professor, one who reflects and meditates on spiritual questions. Practical governance is not my strong point, and this is certainly a weakness, but I do not see myself as a failure. For 8 years, I carried out my work. So here we go. He's set up. They've got Interpol involved. They've got the Vatican Bank being audited. They got formal reports coming out. There's been activity taken to deal with priest abuse that hadn't really been well implemented in the past because of the deep state. He got the investigation going, and the report now is being prepared for his successor. It's time for him to resign. And the night he resigns, this happens. Remember the bolt of lightning that hit the Washington Monument in 2020? And everybody goes, what the hell is that? We said then, times are changing. Well, if you look at this is the night that he resigns. In effect, his coup d'etat was completed. Like I said, before he resigned, he prepared that 300-page report. He had it ready for his successor. And then on March 13th, Francis becomes a pope. Now, if you're Catholic, you're going to enjoy this. A Catholic who knows about apparitions. One of the things he did on the day he was made pope, he kept saying, and I remember this like it was yesterday. I kept wondering, why are you doing this? Kept saying, pray for me, pray for me, pray for me. Hindsight being what it is, I get it now. The other thing he did is he led the crowd in the Pater Ave Gloria, which is a form of a rosary where you say the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be 7 times. It's a form of a rosary. It came out of a Marian apparition called Medjugorje, and many of you know that. What this is a nice little hint that he is very much in line with the Medjugorje apparitions, which again talk about perdition just like 400 years ago. What that also brings to your mind, it should, is he's probably very much in line with what's going on at Garabandal. This is Pope Francis. So one of the things I'd like to hopefully that you come away with here is that if we didn't have Francis, if we didn't have Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, there wouldn't have been a Pope Francis. And Pope Francis is the reason why the Vatican is cleaning up. Benedict knew he couldn't. He got everything put in place, but he knew he did not have the skills necessary to effect the changes. So when it comes to this whole Vatican story, I hope what I've given you is the understanding that there is always more than what people are talking about. And this is something I've been researching since 2018 with everything I've got. And I couldn't be more excited about what I'm watching. We are sitting here now at a point in history when all of this is coming out. I've got a lot of it documented. I hope I've given you enough reason to come back for part 3. And I do encourage you, if you're into reading a good book, this book is fantastic. This is just the preface. The Argentine Pope continues to encounter many obstacles in the Roman Curia and in the ranks of the Catholic hierarchy worldwide. This, by the way, is put out in 2015. Arising from inertia, from a refusal to abandon the habits of the past, and from attachment to rigid dogmatic structures. He says here, the government of Benedict XVI had driven the church between 2005 and 2007 as many of the crises that Pope Francis was taking on. And Ratzinger had intuited, even before he was elected, that Catholicism could no longer be governed as a monarchy, but as in so many other cases, he lacked the courage to innovate. Now, in the 3rd year of his pontificate, Pope Francis continues to press on with the determination drawn down the road of reform, aiming to reshape the structure of the Roman Catholicism, the way of life, of its institution, the church's approach to the contemporary world. And keep coming down. The word revolution is not out of place. It is a continuation of the great shift heralded by the Vatican II Council. His objective is to involve bishops, clergy, and laity in this project for change. Yet it is difficult to reform the church, and even more difficult to change its long-standing mechanisms of command. That's the biggest issue he had to face. The opponents are tenacious, and behind the scenes, their aggressiveness has provoked a growing campaign to make the Pope look illegitimate. We've all seen it. And I fell prey to it until I did my research. Their hope is that Bergoglio pontificate will end soon, which it just ended this year. So he hung on to the bitter end. Francis made an allusion to these modern Pharisees, these are the hierarchy, who experience qualms of science. Qualms of conscience, particularly when their comfort, their wealth, their prestige, their power, and their reputation are in question. And he stressed that they have done so throughout history. So I have hopefully shown you a very good reason why there's a lot to be excited about what's going on at the Vatican. And before I close out, we've got another 15 minutes. I couldn't keep up with this, so if somebody could show me, can someone in the chat give a quick synopsis of how this relates to today? Want my brain to wrap around yesterday's excellent information. Are you referring to the White Horse I talked about at the open of the show? Is that what you're referring to, Taylor? I have to wait. Hello. I don't know how long it takes to see the chat light up, but I'm wondering if that's what you're referring to. The global mafia was using the Vatican Bank to stoke global chaos and conflict. Is being cleaned out and brought back to God along with the people. Yes. Yes. Feisty typing. Yes. And when I opened the show today, before we got into this deck, I made a couple of slides. I don't know what you're referring to, Taylor. You're going to have to, instead of using one words, you're going to have to give me a little bit more hint. I don't know what you're referring to. I can't help what I can't see. Anybody else have any comments or questions they'd like to give to me? I can't I can scroll back. Yeah, I see that it's about a minute or two delay. I want her to do it now. Now, can't wait. The suspense. I don't know what you're referring to. What the Ridley? Oh, stop it. Of all you taught today on the Vatican, please help me understand how to correlate to today in history. Okay, what I tried to lay out is that for the better part of the 20th century, while the world was going to hell in a handbasket with a lot of mayhem, death, chaos, famine, there was a shadow government installing deep states all around the world, and the Vatican was not immune. We see the Vatican also had the same problem. And what they were doing is they were using these networks to affect their efforts at increased power and control. Their goal was to make governments more fascist versus communist, right? They wanted fascism. And we see in today's decks, you can see where it was established in the Vatican, where they ended up using money that was laundered through the Vatican to install a fascist government in Italy. And then it started to expand and go around the world. So that was part of the story. The other part of the story is, in order to get this system well entrenched into place, you have to use bribery and blackmail. Well, carnal needs of men come into play. And the whole idea of sexual abuse, money laundering, lavish lifestyles, that's the subject of all these reports that were being put out. All of this can be used to control those people in positions to help you keep your system in place. And that's the story of what the Vatican is. And like Benedict said, is that Pope Francis said, the qualms of conscience, particularly when their comfort, their wealth, their prestige, their power, and their reputation are in question, he called them Pharisees for doing that. So the reason for the background was so that as I show you moving forward how all of this is unraveled, you'll begin to understand exactly what's being unraveled. Not just, oh, we cleaned up the bank, because it's more than that. Does that help, Taylor? Anybody else? I have no idea. So, as was done to America and countries struggling like UK, Britain, Australia, Ireland, etc., was done in the Vatican too. Yes. Remember, what's the nuance of the Vatican versus any other religion? It's a country. Since 1929, the Vatican was made a country. That's the Lateran Treaty. So because it's a country, the head of state is the Pope, right? The chair. The deep state are these cardinals, and they're controlled by the shadow government, the global mafia, to do what? To create incidences of terrorism to install fascist governance. Is that? Thank you for that, 12 popcorn. So where do we stand now? Are you guys comfortable with what I showed you today? Or is it something you've got to digest and watch 3 or 4 times? Because I've heard that too. And while I'm waiting to see if there's any other comments to be made before I close out, can you please like my channel? Can you please help me get some visibility? Can you please share what you just heard? And of course, if you like my work, you can support me both here and on my Cash App and Venmo. That is $ FeistyCat17. I would appreciate that. This is a very new venture for me. I hope I've lived up to your expectations. Have I? We'll find out. We'll see how many likes I get. With that, we're just shy of 10 minutes short of the 2-hour mark. I am going to close out because I can't see any more And we point to England, London as the ground zero of the shadow government. Yeah, I've done that. And you have to go back and watch the first 2 slides I put in this deck when we opened today. Or should I just go back and do it again? I can do that. Let me do that. Let me go through. Yeah, scroll up. Close your eyes, everybody. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. Nope. I got too far. So, today is the 3rd signal, the 3rd sign that I needed to approve. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. In November of 2020, Attorney General Barr gets a white horse. What is Attorney General Barr? He is the top law enforcement person for the United States. So that's governance, the weaponized government part. He gets his white horse. In February of 24, the king gets his white horse. That's the monetary side of the triangle. 3 cities, right? DC, and now we got London. And then today, the Pope gets his white horse. That's the 3rd side of the triangle, influence. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? So now the Pope's got his white horse. Why is that so important? Go back to Revelation 19. Actually, like I said earlier, let's start with the incarnation, the notice of the incarnation. When God told the angels he wanted to be incarnate, Lucifer didn't want that. Lucifer hated the idea of bowing down to a simple man. So God gave Saint Michael the order to cast Lucifer and a 1/3 of the stars out of heaven to earth. Remember? And then comes along Abraham. What did God tell Abraham? Your descendants will number as the stars. So here we are. Lucifer leaves heaven. Abraham's descendants will number as the stars. What are the stars? They're the angels. They're the battalions of angels. You've got 1/3 of the stars support God the Father. 1/3 of the stars support God the Holy Spirit. 1/3 of the stars, God the Son. When the 1/3 of the stars were cast out of heaven, then Christ is left without stars. Christ then, or angels, Christ then is incarnate. He becomes a man. He's divine nature, man and God. And what do we find out? He sets up a church. What is the church? You and I. What are we? We are descendants of Abraham, descendants that number as the stars. We replace the army of Lucifer. So, that said, when we replace the army of Lucifer, we do so in a flawed state. Man is flawed. Christ brought back the opportunity for us to have everlasting life, even though we don't deserve it, if we truly repent. And that gets into the 3 sides of the triangle story that I pointed to yesterday and Monday. But here we are at Revelations. We're at a place where now the 3 pieces to man's governance system, if you look, monetary, governance, and influence, the 3 pieces are covered in white. They're aligned with God. God is now at the helm. I hope that sits well with all of you. With that, please, everybody, have a blessed day. Have a wonderful, wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you all on Monday on Feisty's show. I'm in Feisty Digs on Sean's show. So take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Questions in the fire. The veil is torn and the seeker never tired. Scrolls of the ancients carved into stone. She reads between lines while the empire grows. The priesthood of medicine, prophets of law.
asking the players in the shadowed game, where the silence breaks, the hidden shakes. She names the unspoken